Hi, everybody. Welcome. Thank you for making the long walk in a gray day. I'm Maggie Farley. I am with the International Center for Journalists. I'm the Director of Innovation and the Knight Fellowships. And I'm really happy to be with this wonderful group here today. We've got Maria Ressa, who barely needs an introduction. In fact, I'm going to let, if you don't know them already, you can read their profile in the program, but I'm assuming that you know a bit about them already. Maria Ressa is the co-founder of and CEO of Rappler. She also has a few other accolades to her name. And I'm going to introduce them and tell you a fun fact that you may not know from them about their bio. And did you know that Maria is a Trekkie, a Star Trek fan? And if she could be in Star Trek, she would be a combination of Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock. Vivian Schiller is the VP and Executive Director of Aspen Digital of the Aspen Institute. She's had many jobs in journalism. The one thing you may not know about her is that she lives with thousands of honeybees in her kitchen, in a hive behind a plexiglass observatory. She always has a fresh supply of honey, which she shares with her friends. And make no mistake about it, she is the queen of the household. we have Ritu Kapur, who's the co-founder and managing director of Quint in India. And she loves Bollywood dance. And she claims that she has 2 left feet, but I think in this crowd we better fact check that. And last but not least is Ed Bice, who is the CEO and board chair of Meedan, which is a fact-checking outfit. And you may have seen a video online from a recent conference, the Nordic AI conference, where Ed Bice seemed to be up on stage with Nile Rodgers and Chic, a big band from the 70s, maybe before a lot of you were born. Remember Le Freak? C'est chic? No, okay. And if you see the video, it is not a deep fake. So that's our panel. So first we're going to start, and we're going to just set the scene and ask each of them what is top of mind right now in this crazy year of AI elections. And then we're just going to have a conversation for about 30 minutes, and then we're going to give you a chance to ask them questions. So you're here because you know that 2024 is a watershed year. It's going to be the biggest election year in history. More than 2 billion people are going to vote this year. But this is in a world that is now 70% of the people in the world are living under autocratic leaders. This could be the year that tips the balance. It's also a year when AI is suddenly accessible, powerful, changing the equation for all of us, especially journalists, but for every single person in the world. So we are going to start by asking our folks what they're thinking about, what's top of mind in this really watershed, incredible year.
So I guess first, for me it is, please question the foundation of our information ecosystem today. The structure of the internet, right? The TCP/IP protocol, the way our social media, the way tech has ruled the world, and what foundational designs have been put in place. Because we will fall off the cliff. We will lose democracy if humans, if we don't push back against what tech has enabled. So bleak. But I guess, will democracy survive? It's up to us.
So coming off, it's very hard to follow Maria, but I will try. And I'm going to just, in my short remarks, just bring it a little bit down to earth and tell you what I've been thinking about, and some of our work at the Aspen Institute is focused on AI and elections and what we can do to make sure that people are not tricked or fooled by AI-generated, highly targeted information. So we're mostly focused on the United States right now. Many people believe that, that AI will be in limited use in the elections in 2024, but that it'll be something of a dress rehearsal for 2028. So what we're focused on this year is to make sure that relevant groups are talking to each other, which sounds very simple, but sadly, it doesn't necessarily always happen. So we're thinking about making sure that in the United States, there's not, even though it is a national elections in the United States are controlled at the state and local level, not at the federal level. There is a federal agency that deals with things not having to do with the way elections are run at the local level. So we are working to make sure that election officials are prepared for what may be coming at them, the kind of highly targeted, false information intended to mislead their constituents, voters in their areas, about the method and means of voting, particularly spoofing the voice of public officials, telling you, calling you up with, and this is something that AI enables, that you could get a robocall saying, Maria, we know that your voting place at Bannockburn Elementary School there is a public disturbance there, do not go. So we've changed your place of voting, and actually we've extended voting from Tuesday to Wednesday. Your vote will be counted. Do not show up at the polling place. It is not safe. Will people be fooled by that? Mostly not, but a lot of them will. So these are the kinds of things I'm more worried about than the big, mostly what we hear about is the big spectacular deep fake of, say, Biden or Trump falling down or who knows what. That may happen. Those will get debunked. It's the stuff through private messaging and through audio and through the ease of reaching people in multiple languages that we don't see, that we have to be most concerned about.
So, a democracy is not necessarily a country where people go and vote for their leader. It has to be people who are well-informed, who vote for a leader they think is going to be good for them, right? But what happens when in a country like India, where digital literacy is so low, and frankly, so far our country has not needed AI for the World Economic Forum their survey has said that India is the country with the highest risk from disinformation. So, we have the demographic dividend, right? We are the most populous country. We have the highest number of young people. Over 1 million young people have been used by what's called the IT cell of the government and even of the opposition parties to generate tons of disinformation that has been circulated, which has allowed the weaponization of religion towards a narrative of Hindu nationalism. The misinformation is massive. So, I don't think AI has been used extensively in the elections. Maybe our elections came very early in the cycle of, the development of AI. But what I'm really, really worrying about is what and how will 1 million people having AI at their disposal, the 1 million people of, members of the IT cell, having AI at their disposal once this government comes to power again. And that's what's keeping me up, really.
I think it was my task to be the hopeful person here. Listening to these comments, though, Vivian, I think it's not just Maria getting a robocall urging her not to vote. It's a synthesized voice of Maria's mother.
Yeah, of course.
Speaking with the sort of cadence and language that model's been trained on to convince Maria that she should not vote. We're facing an incredibly uncertain future, not only for our information ecosystem and the democracies that rely on it, but for the future of journalism. And I think that, useful phrase, the liar's dividend. When a politician, spends enough time setting the stage for a fraudulent election that becomes an expectation, and AI is somehow, it's like a liar's dividend for all knowledge. It's not, I think the issue is not so much with AI and its implications for deep fakery. It's AI's implication on the possibility of trust that underlies the journalism that we need to support democracy. So, hopeful. What I'm trying to do in my work at Meedan, and what I think is critically important for everyone in this room to buy into, is the idea that this is fundamentally a challenge of addressing scaled disinformation, and that requires that we, join hands, that we collaborate, that we think about sharing data, that we think about sharing resources, content that we're producing, and that we think about, and I'll talk more about this, using technologies that amplify that across different surfaces, messaging platforms, open web, et cetera. So, top of mind.
Okay, so that's really interesting. So we've heard that from Ritu that she's less worried about the use of AI before the elections than the politicians and the government using it after the elections. And Ed was saying that misinformation has been around as long as there have been politicians. The real threat maybe is not AI, but people not being able to believe anything. So is this a lot of hype? Are we talking about AI in elections and being scared for nothing? Or is there something we should be afraid of?
I mean, I'm going to jump in. It isn't hype. What is hype is the kinds of promises that you implicitly get for generative AI. That's one. Journalists are being pushed to generative AI. We have no choice, right? So in Rappler, for example, that we do use it, but we've trained it, and we don't want to make the same mistake we made in the first AI group, which was the first contact, which was to put that share button on our websites and then share our relationships with our community with big tech. Because the minute we throw them into there, that's when the algorithms, the insidious manipulation began. So I think that's the first. I think the second thing is, and this goes to the statement that I made, I'm sorry, I'm going to focus much more on the tech here. Please understand right now, generative AI is speculative. It's speculative. And what do I mean by that? Last year, $27 billion was spent on generative AI. For those people who spent that money, they want to tell you that it can do everything, and that it will be your guide, right? But here's the reality. Soon after, it was rolled out in November 2022 by OpenAI, the ChatGPT, and then an arms race began, right? An NGO, a mental health NGO in the United States, rolled out a chatbot immediately because their workers were forming a union. It lasted like a week or so because the chatbot was spewing the wrong advice. And you can replicate this message all around. So I think the first is understand that the way it's built, like the first AI of social media, is not anchored on facts, right? So don't rely on it for facts. And secondly, walk into it with your eyes wide open. Retain control for your news organization and power it yourself. Sorry, I sound like I love tech, but I feel like the hype of the tech industry, the hype of Silicon Valley is pushing us to the edge.
So you were asking also, like, is the hype in terms of a threat to elections, is that real or not? So let me just give a couple of specifics. There have been instances in elections in the last 6 months where AI has been used to mislead. I'll give you a couple of those examples, but I will cut to the chase and say we have no empirical evidence that the use of those AIs actually influenced an election. We don't know that. But just a couple of examples. In Slovakia, before the Slovakian elections, the leading progressive candidate, there was an AI audio of him appearing to be conspiring to rig the elections. And one of the most insidious parts of that is that audio was released right before they have a quiet period in the 2 days before the elections, no coverage. That audio went out right before the quiet period so that the media could not debunk it to the public and the candidate couldn't speak to it. Another example was, I think it was in Indonesia, there was a candidate, a female candidate, highly Muslim country, released of her in a bikini. Again, just to undermine her legitimacy. In the United States, in the New Hampshire primaries, there was a robocall. This was Democrat on Democrat violence, as they put it interestingly. This was Joe Biden's voice in a robocall instructing voters not to vote in the Democratic primary, where he was the only candidate, because that would help the Republicans. There's another example in the mayor of New York, Eric Adams, put out messages to his constituents in New York, and he did it in, I don't know, like there's hundreds of languages in New York, but like 40 different languages in his own voice. Now, is that a bad thing? No. Was it disclosed? Also no. That's a problem. So we're beginning to see the uses of this. None of these, again, we cannot say dispositively that they have affected the elections, but there is clearly a lot of experimentation going on right now. And so that's why the notion of 2024 as a dress rehearsal is fascinating. That's why we must study what is happening right now. And it's harder and harder to study that because the tech platforms have cut their content moderation teams, have cut their trust and safety teams. Certain members of Congress are issuing subpoenas, and certain Trump allies are issuing lawsuits to try to get civil society and research groups from doing their work. So all of these things are conspiring to make that kind of data where we can measure and see what happens very difficult. So this does feel like a moment in time where we need to be understanding more and more, and the means to understand it is less and less.
Sorry, can I just add on the elections, like the companies say, a company like Midjourney or DALL-E, they will say that they will not allow their tech to be used for elections, especially in the US elections. But we know for a fact that in the Indonesian elections last February, the new president of Indonesia, Prabowo, the son-in-law of former President Suharto, who was in power for almost 32 years, used Midjourney to be able to create photos of him. So he's a general, former general who had human rights violations. My time when I was still reporting. Midjourney made him look like a cuddly bear. And he won, right? That doesn't mean that's the only reason, but again, who's accountable for the fact that Midjourney was used? The candidates will try, but do these companies have any accountability?
If I could come in here, the other thing that I think, there's a lot of conversation about regulating the use of AI. The question that haunts us in India is which is the entity who should be regulating AI? We know, you guys have talked about what tech platforms are doing or not doing. Just a few days back, YouTube allowed the ruling party's ads to go up in India, which they were all just factually incorrect. They were all complete disinformation. But also, I don't know whether you have come across this incident where there was an Indian citizen who asked Gemini whether Modi was fascist, and the response said that because of some of his policies, some experts have characterized his policies as fascist. That led to a sledgehammer sort of regulation coming down from the IT minister in India, saying that no LLM, no AI model, no software using AI can be used in the country or deployed in the country without the explicit approval of the government of India. Now, so I know for a fact that already the government has been using AI for propaganda in the country. So you don't want an entity that is exploiting AI for their own benefit to be the regulatory body for it. I think one of the things that is really, really important, because you have to be careful what you wish for, you don't know how much regulation you really want to be imposed on you, is one of the things that I think is really, really important is, especially in a country like India, is media literacy, digital literacy, and it's not just something that we can just put out on digital platforms. I think that needs to be grassroots, going door to door. It's pretty much what the BJP IT cell workers do. They go door to Indians, and they open their phones, and they tell them who to follow, what they can do. So the similar media literacy has to be done at the grassroots level, because that's the only, I don't think regulation is the solution as much as individuals understanding what AI is, what disinformation is.
Yeah, so I'll build from that and maybe start getting a little applied here in describing some of our work. So autocracy is on the rise, we know that. And the issue around trusted authorities to regulate AI and to govern fair elections is, it is contingent on the authorities in that country being good actors. And increasingly, that is not the case. So in lieu of that, we need projects that can bypass those authorities, network civil society, and network media with civil society, and improve the information landscapes. So two projects where we did this pretty effectively. One was with Maria's team in the Philippines. And that was a heroic effort which put a dent in a media ecosystem that was what Maria, you termed it the product of historical amnesia, to recast the fame and glory and goodness and kindness of the first Marcos regime. But that was a scaled effort across civil society, across media, and hope Maria can talk more about that. In Brazil, I hope some of our Brazilian fact checkers are in the audience today. I know they're at the conference. We were able to network Brazilian fact checkers and then create a chat bot that fed on the content created by those fact checkers, was exposed through a highly trusted government election authority in Brazil, the TSE, and that as a result, reached millions of Brazilians who were looking for good voting information. So I think that against this tide of eroding trust, collaborative projects leaning into and leveraging AI to respond to the threats that, the Wild West of this new information ecosystem, Gen AI-driven information ecosystem is like, to me, the most critical thing that we as journalists can be doing. And so I'll pass it back to Maggie, but I think that, trust is built through meaningful scaled collaborations, and that is the antidote.
That's really interesting. We can talk more about the threats that AI poses, but for a moment, let's follow up on what Ed was saying about how you're using AI for good to make AI-powered chatbots to be very responsive to these questions about suspect information. And Maria, I know that Rappler has used AI to make tools. Can you tell us a bit about those?
Yeah, so I think if you went to the Open Society AI, they also worked at AI in newsrooms, right? The Rappler actually it's our young kids in Rappler who won that global competition. And here's the interesting part. The product was called TLDR, Too Long Didn't Read. It was very specifically for our Gen Z, for a Gen Z audience. The Filipinos, the median age is young, right? A few years ago, it was 23 years old, but Gen Z is coming up. You want to make sure that TikTok doesn't capture them all. And it is AI generated. But our production head didn't want to put it on Rappler because the quality wasn't good enough. So you have to kind of, this is a time to make these distinctions. So we put it on social media where you've heard the phrase, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that phrase, and the enshittification of the public sphere. Yeah, so we're going to get deluged with crap. So that's one, right? You have to experiment. Every story on Rappler, starting in last year, I can't remember which month, but we started playing with 3 bullet point summary for every article. If you want to use that, we can send you how to make it as accurate as possible, but also be transparent that you're doing that. Here's the impact. It increases time on site. We're not the only news site that did that. A Swedish news site also did the same thing, and they had the same results. And then finally, on the last thing that Ed was talking about, we partnered in May 2022, and the goal was we pulled together about 150 different organizations, 16 news organizations at the bottom of the pyramid. For civil society in the mesh layer, which is distribution, there were 116, 8 academic institutions, and then rule of law, legal groups that protected the pyramid. Our goal was to take over the center of our social media information ecosystem with facts which don't spread. And I'll just say 2 things that came out of that. One was every single partner was supposed to share these boring fact checks with emotion, but they can't use anger. And what we found was that inspiration spreads as fast as anger. We detailed this because we used Meedan to literally take the data from the 16 news organizations and share it with all 150. We did a data privacy agreement among the group, right? So there's a lot of stuff. Having said that, Ferdinand Marcos Jr. won, but he started in 2014. We did this in 3 months. What can we do together? Oh, we took over the center of the information ecosystem. We did.
That's great. I want to put that on a T-shirt. Inspiration spreads as fast as anger.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of uses of AI. I mean, again, coming back to specifically also to elections, there are ways, and again, 2024 is a year of experimentation. We keep repeating that, but there are definitely positive use cases for in AI in elections. I mentioned earlier New York Mayor Eric Adams putting out those messages in so many different languages. I think, again, I think the only issue there was just the lack of disclosure that he doesn't actually know how to speak those languages. Other than that, language is one of the most exciting developments of generative AI. That people who have been out of the information loop because they speak, very minority languages that are not prioritized for tech companies can now get vital civic information, in their own language, in their own dialect. Can this also be used for by the bad guys? Absolutely. But in the hands of election officials, it's actually very exciting. Chatbots to get instant information about voting places, very exciting. The key thing is to help educate the public to know where they should go, how they should validate that the information that they're getting actually came from election officials and not from, somebody who's trying to mislead them. But yeah, there's a lot of exciting opportunities there.
I think one more thing that's important is for journalists to really upskill and understand every possible tool that is available now, because one of the things that you have to keep doing is fact-checking, right? And there are now, you can't be doing fact-checking the way you've been doing fact-checking so far. You have to be able to fact-check through voice cloning, through video deep fakes, etc. So to be able to work with tech companies that are developing tools which can be used to identify, and then to be able, once you've used that tool to identify something as fake or as a deep fake, then to be able to use these tools of, like in a country like India, to your point about languages and, reaching out through languages, that is, we're over 100 languages in the country, to be able to, at speed, at scale, use cheap and easy technology at the hands of, local level NGOs as well, along with newsrooms, having done the fact check, to disseminate that fact check as soon as possible. Because one of the challenges that we have as fact checkers is we're trailing behind. Misinformation goes out rapidly, and we take so much time to do the fact check. So I think we have to be able to harness AI to our advantage in newsrooms.
I want to go back to the initial framing and this issue of trust and the liar's dividend. And Maria, you're mentioning the legal top of the pyramid reminded me to bring this in. When Trump was running in 2016, he used the term fake news really effectively, and he called into question, the output of CNN or NPR or, news outlet of choice. AI calling into question the veracity of anything you read, combined with, or kind of setting the ground for, a really aggressive effort to delegitimize journalism coming from the Congress of the United States, specifically from the Weaponization Committee, is targeting journalists and researchers and basically framing journalism as censorship. It's this beautiful narrative that intersects populism and says, hey, and intersects the rise of influencer journalism and says, hey, it's not just fake news over there. Any act of journalism is an act of censorship.
Meaning gatekeeping, if you're a gatekeeper.
Yeah.
Can I just add something to that real quick?
Yep.
What's so incredibly insidious about this effort that Ed is talking about, they're also going after the tech companies. So, I know we have issues with a lot of the tech companies, such that the tech companies and the parts of the federal government who are monitoring risks are now, their lawyers are telling them not to speak to each other, even though they have vital information to share, because they are in the crosshairs of this committee. And so it has had a chilling effect on researchers, on those in the tech companies who are trying to squash bad behavior, from federal officials entirely.
Yeah, and
all of us.
Yeah, and Chatham House rules. I know it's on the internet, but no.
This is public.
Yeah. The chilling effect is also extending to funding into these spaces. So, understandably and regrettably, platforms have moved away from funding a US 24 project that Maria and I were forwarding, and that we're going to take forward in some form, some way, shape, or form. So if you're a journalist in the US and you want to participate, and you're down with the idea of sharing data and trying to have a scaled effort to address misinformation in the run-up to the 24 election, ed at Meedan.com. I think that we can't overstate how dramatically bad it is for the world to have these multiple forces aligning to delegitimize the practice of journalism. And it's against all the existential threats that we're facing right now, from business models, funding, you know, this might be the most serious, because it's the possibility of doing journalism and having it viewed as, you know, something credible and worthy of happening in society outside of a TikTok page.
Well,
So,
to pick up from Ed, though, this has happened in our countries.
Who's supposed to be the hopeful one here?
Oh, yeah.
But
shoot, sorry.
well, this is happening in the global south, right? This has happened. The chilling effect is real in our countries. And I mean, you know, and if you want to be, there was a point in time in the Philippines where in order to continue working, we had to be okay with going to jail for the rest of your life, right? And that still hangs there. But for it to be happening in America, I think it seems new, but it's the same tactic. And then, so it's spreading like a virus. I mean, I hate to use the word virus, but I also want to pick up, Vivian said something about chatbots that you can use, right? I just want to point you to research that was done at the Institute of Global Politics, where we've done a partnership as well, right? But what did it do? Chatbot. This is Julia Angwin and Alondra Nelson pulled together an interface that connected, you would put in a prompt to 5 of the top LLMs to see if you can use it for elections. And there were about 40 people, 40 journalists, election officials, right? It was Mistral was the one you wouldn't normally hear, but Anthropic, so Claude was there, OpenAI, Llama, and Gemini, so the top 5. What they found was 51% of the chatbot's response on all 5 was wrong. So again, probabilistic machine, right?
It's early days, yeah. There's hopeful that there may be some positive use cases down the road.
So, you know, in India, for instance, there is a complete media capture because large legacy media is now the ownership of most of the media in India is now concentrated in the hands of a few corporates who are, you know, close to the powers that be. That large media has already been belting out, it's pretty much the mouthpiece of the government. It's also contributing to putting out a lot of disinformation. News media itself is putting out a lot of disinformation. Now, if you look at what they're using AI for, they're using AI for increasing, exponentially increasing the volume of content that they are putting out. So there's more trash in the system. That's also more propagandist disinformation in the system coming, so to say, from legitimate news sources. There is just a handful of us independent news outfits who are left. But the drowning out of this voice is going to be so absolute, because there's also generative search that's going to come in, which means that I, as a user, it'll lead to complete anonymizing of brands of news. Right now, you know that New York Times gives you a certain voice, you know that ProPublica gives you a certain voice, Guardian gives you another voice on, say, climate change. But what generative search is going to do using AI is it's going to give you a summary. When you go search for something, it will not take you to different news sites. It will give you a summary of the news. So and remember, as more and more of us are blocking AI crawlers from crawling our content, it's possible that what LLMs are crawling is also a lot of disinformation. Now, the generative search may be serving up incorrect information. It's also completely obliterating or blurring different brands of news. And it's going to kill, our relationship with our readers. And this is going to, press freedom, this just stifles us that much more.
Right, so that's an interesting point you just made. As the information ecosystem is polluted with all of this sometimes false, deliberate, and accidental disinformation, misinformation, it should elevate all of our fact-based reporting, all of our authentic news, the people out there in the streets and on the front lines. It should add value to journalism. Why do you think that's not happening? And what do you think that we can do about it in this important election year? How can journalists grapple with AI and the information?
I think one of the reasons why it's not happening is because big tech is allowing a lot of misinformation. You know, the example that I gave of YouTube a few days ago, which just allowed a lot of government ads to go through, which was out and out disinformation. What can we do is, I just keep thinking about this, and I really feel that it's, in some way, we have to, as news media, engage a little more with our audiences. I think while we do our investigations, our fact-based reporting, I think we have to find ways in which, I know this is not a very popular view, but I think influencers, especially news influencers, have shown us the way. Their lives are dependent on people consuming their content. So they've found every possible way to connect with their audiences. I think it's time for independent newsrooms, at least in India, to take a leaf out of that playbook. We have to be where the audiences are. We have to be in formats which, at least, maybe a 60-seconder is not going to be able to give you the kind of detail that that information requires to be, engaged with. But at least it whets the appetite of the audience to know that there is a counter-narrative. I think we didn't spend enough of our time worrying about our audiences. So I think you've got to be purist about your journalism. But after that, how to reach out, write the AI technology to disseminate. Don't shy away from it.
I disagree and agree. I disagree with the fact that, everything is pushing us to TikTok. But we also know, just based on what's happened, right? So the real answer, why can't the facts take center stage, is because the distribution of the big tech companies, and I would include TikTok there now, right? Actually discourage it. Because you don't keep scrolling when you read the news. It's really kind of seen as boring. Should we do what influencers do? I always say, please don't call journalists an influencer. But no offense, influencer, right? Because an influencer to me is paid. Sorry. Again, like paid in the sense of the design begins the corruption of the information ecosystem. You as a journalist, you're not going to give the story that that person with money wants, right? But the influencer will want your follows and the money that goes into that, a lot of the stuff, right? I'm sorry to generalize, but I think, so first, the design of the platforms prioritize lies and the kind of weaponization of our emotions. And then the second one is that we haven't, and I agree with you in the fact that we need to come together. We need to move out of the virtual world into the real world, into our real elections. Americans are walking, Europeans are walking into the most vulnerable elections we have ever had. And it is because, and this is from the companies themselves, it's because the incentive for them to do anything isn't there, right? If Trump wins, he's seen as a vindictive candidate who would run after the tech companies that would aggressively become gatekeepers, i.e. facts. So it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Who wins?
Maria, if I could come in here. At this moment, one of the things that at least I want to worry about is independent news media in India has now shrunk. It's very small. Its audience is also not scaling up. It's almost like we're reaching out, staying within that filter bubble, echo chamber, what have you. Which is why at this moment, over the next 40 days is the time that we have to make a difference. So if the influencers are being able to reach out with their ill-informed, let me not brand it as ill-informed. There are a few influencers in India who actually
no offense meant, influencers.
Who are actually doing some decent work. There's, of course, a whole bunch who are doing very questionable work. But at this point, in these 40 days, if we can do everything, in Hindi, there's this phrase, Sam, Dam, Dand, Bhed, which is good, bad, ugly, evil, to be able to communicate your solid, investigative, fact-based journalism across to the people. So when they're going to the polls, there's a chance that they have come across your content and are better informed. I think at this moment, maybe once the elections are done, maybe we sit back and reevaluate where we are, how we're going to survive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But right now, I think we've got to do what you can.
Absolutely. All right, we do want to leave a time for a couple of questions. So we've got microphones ready. Why don't we start there? Yes.
Hello. I'm wondering, so we spent a lot of time talking about the big tech companies, and I'm wondering, is it possible for you to also talk with them and reach them? Would they listen to this?
Let me answer, because I've been talking to them and still working with them, even as I'm critical, right? We've been working with them. In fact, Rappler was like an alpha partner of Facebook before Facebook became Meta, before it opened an office in the Philippines in 2016, a month before our elections that elected Rodrigo Duterte, right? So yes, we do talk to them all the time. I will say Google is the most grown up of the group. We're partners with OpenAI. We're partners with Twitter, now called X. But that doesn't stop us. So you can talk all the time, but when the person or the company doesn't listen, what do? You talk out, right? Go, Meedan.
So we have, the reason we're able to spin up these election projects, and we're running in 9 countries this year, is that we've got a consistent partnership with WhatsApp.
Forgot partnerships.
So we started the WhatsApp fact-checking program after a pilot during the 2019 Indian election. That the consistency of that program is what allows us to spin up at the moment an election is happening. So these partnerships are incredibly important. And we are seeing the early growth of that program. It's stalled. It's still going on. It's still really important for us, but the platforms are not taking seriously enough the commitment that they're getting, by the way, that they're getting penalized for under DSA for addressing disinformation. And so, as our business models are stalling, the prospect of those platforms really reconsidering what they're doing in light of those that regulatory downside and injecting a ton more money into journalism around these exceptional events like elections is, I think, something that we all, as citizens and advocates for democracy should be looking for.
In India, for instance, we have reached out. All the fact checkers in India have come together, and we have set up, with Meta, we've set up a deepfakes analysis unit. I think you have to constantly be in conversation like Maria is. And we hope some good comes out of this.
Yeah, I was going to just quickly say that I think there's a lot of pressure coming from civil society groups, from news organizations. And to their credit, a lot of the big AI companies are beginning to have put in place certain measures prohibiting deepfakes of candidates, et cetera, et cetera. There was, Microsoft and OpenAI and Google and Anthropic and others. It is, what they have done is necessary. It is, of course, not sufficient. So we have to maintain that dialogue, always.
And let me add, what Ed and I did in the Philippines, that was with Google, right? So Google helped us pull together about 150 different groups. But again, it goes back to this not only isn't enough, you still are using the very same things. And look at the 3 things there, right? Surveillance capitalism. Do data privacy laws exist, right? Do ethics exist? The second, coded bias. If you are a woman or LGBTQ+, the tech has coded bias, and those need to be addressed. They still haven't been. And finally, Ed talked about this, journalists, the business model of journalists, because we're now being distributed on these tech platforms, is dying, if not dead. Right? So it isn't for lack of trying. We need to work with tech. It's an important thing. But is this the only world where tech can move?
We have 50 seconds left, so if you can ask a really fast question, we'll try to give you a really fast answer.
Hello, I'm a Romanian journalist, and I had a small proposal for you. In fact, it's not a question. You mentioned a lot of threats of the AI for the journalists, for the general public, but I think we have to admit that AI is offering a lot of opportunities. And we are here, a lot of journalists from smaller countries, from smaller newsrooms. And the proposal is maybe your organizations, especially those that are addressing a lot of countries, like the Aspen Institute, could collect and give examples of good AI practices, good AI software companies, solutions, AI solutions, because
We're doing that.
frankly, it's quite difficult when you're in a small newsroom with 2 or 3 or 5 people to, gather and find all the good solutions that could help your newsroom. Thank you.
Oh, so Vivian says that she is indeed, they are doing that at Aspen Institute, so that's great. And just, I found an interesting site, Rest of World is gathering examples of AI being used in elections for deepfakes, for memes, for targeted information. And so they're looking for people to upload examples from your country. So look for that, Rest of World. But thank you very much for coming and participating in this conversation. These are the most interesting people in the world.